This video is for homework and mastery 2.4, multiplying and dividing integers. When we want to find the product of 3 times -5, we can write the product as repeated addition, as we've seen in other videos. 3 times -5 is the same thing as -5 repeated 3 times. -5 plus -5 plus -5. In that case, -5 plus a -5 is -10, plus another -5 is -15, as shown here. Therefore, 3 times -5 is equal to -15. But let's look at the actual procedure for determining the sign of a product. The product will be positive if there is an even number of negative signs. The product will be negative if there is an odd number of negative signs. In this previous example, I had one negative sign in the product. This one's positive, this one's negative. Odd number of negative signs means my final answer is negative. Let's look at some other examples. +8 times +6. I don't have any negatives, so my answer is going to be +48. Here, I have a +8 times a -6. I have one negative sign. Since I have one negative sign, my answer will be negative. It's an odd, 1 is an odd number. Again here, it's negative. Here, I have two negatives, negative times negative, which is even, so the answer is positive. Negative times negative will give me a +48. Let's look at this example. -6 times -1 times -4. Going back to our order of operations, remember that we do multiplication in order from left to right. Negative times negative, -6 times -1, would give me a +6. Because negative times negative, there's two negatives, which is even, would give me a +6. +6 times a -4, that's a positive times a negative. There's one negative, therefore my answer would be -24. Look at this example. I have -4 times -2 times 3 times -4 times 1. I could do the same procedure as I did in the previous example, but I could also look at it and say, okay, how many negative signs do I have? I have 1, 2, 3 negative signs. 3 negative signs is odd. Therefore, my answer will be negative since I have an odd number of negative signs. So I can also look at it this way. My answer is going to be negative, and then I take this multiplication. 4 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 1. And my answer will be -96. Now, when we're looking at exponents with integers as bases, we have to be very careful. Suppose that the number is written in exponent form and the base is negative. The result is positive if the exponent is even, and the result is negative if the exponent is odd. This is the case if it is written in parentheses. Here, -2 raised to the 5th power. Notice the -2 is in parentheses, which is the same thing as writing it -2 times -2 times -2 times -2 times -2. And since there are 5 negatives, that would mean my answer would be negative. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. So my answer would be negative 32. Let's look at these two examples. We have to be very careful here. One is written without the parentheses, one is written inside the parentheses. Here, the 4 is the only thing raised to the second power. The negative is not included in the exponent form. So when we rewrite this, the negative is on the outside and the 4 is what is multiplied by itself 2 times. So I have 4 times 4, which is 16, and my answer is negative. So if the negative is not inside parentheses, my answer will be negative. Here, the entire negative 4 is inside the parentheses, and it is squared. This results in negative 4 times negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 4 will give me a positive 16. These two examples are extremely important for us to note. You'll want to put a star next to these in your notebook. If it's not inside the parentheses, the negative does not get written out multiple times. If it is inside the parentheses, that is what gets written out multiple times. Let's look at division. Division is the exact same thing as multiplication. If there is an even number of negative signs, your answer will be positive. If there's an odd number of negative signs, your answer will be negative. And then you multiply and divide the absolute values of the numbers, just like we did in multiplication. For example, 36 divided by 12. They're both positive, therefore my answer is going to be positive. 36 divided by 12 is going to be 3. Here, I have 36 divided by a negative 12. I have one negative sign. That is odd. So my answer will be negative. A negative 3. Negative 36 divided by positive 12. Again, I have one negative sign. So again, my answer will be negative. Notice these two answers are exactly the same, but my negative started out on the opposite numbers. It is because I had one negative and one positive. Still resulted in the same answer. D says negative 36 divided by negative 12. I have two negatives here. That means that I have an even number of negative signs. So my answer will be positive. Positive 3. Let's look at a few more examples. Perform the indicated operation. I have 54 divided by a negative 9. 8 times a negative 7. Negative 15 times a negative 2. Negative 78 divided by a negative 6. See what you get. Did you get these answers? 54 divided by a negative 9 is negative 6 because I only had one negative. 8 times a negative 7 is a negative 56. Again, I only had one negative. Negative 15 times a negative 2 gives me a positive 30 because I had two negatives. Negative 78 divided by a negative 6 gives me a positive 13. Two negatives. Let's look at where we have to evaluate some of these problems, as we have done in previous exercises. I have x divided by negative y, for where x is equal to a negative 24 and y is equal to a negative 3. Let's take this one for example. Remember to put your variables inside parentheses, leaving this negative on the outside, and replacing them with the numbers that they correspond with. So I have negative 24 divided by a negative 3. This is extremely important because what this means is the opposite of negative 3. Well, what is the opposite of negative 3? It's going to be positive 3. Now then, what is negative 24 divided by a positive 3? I have one negative sign, so my answer is going to be negative 8. Let's look at x to the third power for x equals negative 4. It's the same thing as, remember, put x in parentheses to the third power. So that means I'm going to put my negative 4 in parentheses to the third power. That would be if I were to take negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. I would have an odd number of negatives. So my answer would be, I apologize, that should say negative 64. Yeah, that should be a negative 64. I do apologize about that. It should be negative 64 since I have an odd number of negatives. If you have questions, please let me know. If you need more help, one of us will be glad to help you. And just raise your hand at any point.